Hello, class. Welcome back, and it's good to be back with you all again. And I hope that you guys have had a good week. I hope that it's been encouraging. I hope that you guys have stayed positive, and I just want to encourage you to stay positive, to stay close to God, and continue to carry on your faith. And I want to share what I've read for my devotions. Specifically today, I was reading about Paul and Silas and how they were thrown in prison after they were beaten and abused, and they were thrown in prison for doing right. And yet, in the middle of it, God comes and He answers their prayers. But what they were doing is they were praying and they were praising God during their hard time. They didn't know that God was going to come save them, but they were praying and they were praising the Lord. So I want to encourage you to stay positive and just praise God for the good things that He has done. For He is good, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and to them who are called. So I pray that you guys are staying encouraged, and I want you to reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, or if you have any issues. Please let me know, and I want to be there for you guys. And I hope that you are enjoying these videos, and I hope this video is a help. Especially as we're preparing for the test. We're going to have a test next Wednesday. We're going to have a test next Wednesday on let me tell you specifically, on the 22nd. So please make sure that you're preparing for that. I'll give you more information on Monday as we review for it, but it'll be 20 and 21, chapter 20 and 21. And we're going to finish chapter 21 today. So I hope you guys enjoyed the first section. Wasn't able to do a video for that, but I do want to hit the last section, make sure we hit some of the highlights, and we'll go through the notes. Should be a pretty quick video. I know I always say that. You may say, no, they're never quick. But it's history. I mean, you could talk forever with history, especially JFK. JFK is a very interesting president, and I want to start off from the very beginning and see where he has come from. So he is the youngest president so far to actually be elected into office, and he is going to really shine. The American people typically like the older men that have run for president because typically we associate age with wisdom, that the older the person is, the more wise that the person is. Well, this is one of those rare occasions where the younger person actually beats the older person. And Kennedy is going to pull out this very, very narrow victory over Nixon. Now, we've heard Nixon before because he's actually going to become a president later on down the road. He hasn't become president yet, but he tries here. He loses to John F. Kennedy. Oh, I put JKF. Should be FK because his name is John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Um, I didn't do that here, so we're good. So JFK wins, and he becomes the youngest president to be elected, not the youngest president. Theodore Roosevelt, will be the youngest president because he came in from vice president. But notice how close this victory was. On page 348 is where I am. You can see a picture of JFK. Um, Notice right below his presidential profile box, you can see the last sentence says within 0.1% of the popular vote. Now, he's not elected by the popular vote, but that shows you how close this election was. That's how much he wins the popular vote by. And there was some discrepancy in some of the Democratic counties, and he was a Democrat. So that's why many people urged Nixon to recount the votes or call for a recount because there was this discrepancy that would be in favor of JFK. But Nixon says, no, I'm not going to go through that trouble. He gave the presidency to Kennedy. Kennedy becomes president, first Roman Catholic president of the United States. Pretty interesting. And he's going to have his work cut out for him. The very first thing that comes up in His presidency is Cuba. Notice the year that Fidel Castro comes into power is 1959. JFK is elected in 1960. He doesn't become president until 1961, but this is right about the time Fidel Castro is coming into power, and we see he's communist. Now, what Fidel Castro is going to do is he's going to convince the Cuban people that he's a liberator because the Cubans were under this fierce dictator named, you can see his name on 349, Batista. Batista was a really bad dictator, but he's not compared to Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro will be much worse. But Castro is going to lie to the Cuban people saying, listen, I'm going to free you of Batista, which he does, but little did the Cubans know that as soon as Castro comes in, then he is going to free him of the dictator, but he's going to be a worse one. So he's going to manipulate the people with that. It's not going to make the Cubans very happy. So the Cubans are going to look to overthrow Castro. Well, there were these group of Cuban freedom fighters that are going to be trained by the United States, and they are going to plan an attack in April on Cuba and specifically on Castro's regime. So they get all of the training, they get all of the supplies, they're ready to go, and they've asked the United States for help, as much help as possible. Kennedy had given them this training, and Kennedy says, "We will provide air support for you to where when you land and you attack his strongholds, we will give you air support." Well, there's stories of these American pilots that were on that mission to give the freedom fighters the air support, and on their way to support the Cuban freedom fighters, their commanders tell them, do not engage. Which means these pilots are flying right over the Cuban fighters. In fact, they can see the fighters fighting against the Castro army. And to be honest, the freedom fighters could not have done it without the air support. And even the Cuban freedom fighters knew that. And that's why they were desperate for Kennedy's help. Kennedy promised them, but then he decided at the very end, no, we are not going to pursue it. Now, one reason why JFK did was because he was afraid of this Cold War escalating. That if there's a full-on assault of Cuba, that Russia's going to get involved, the Soviet Union at this time, and he was very scared of that. So he decides to no, pull back the air support. So these pilots do not engage, and the freedom fighters are destroyed. They are unsuccessful, and Castro, as we know, um, continues in his power. So JFK, this is really kind of a black mark in his presidency. But one kind of good thing that he does against communism, he loses it in Cuba, but he really holds firm in Germany. The Soviets always want control, and they want as much control as possible, and they want to spread communism as much as possible. So the fact that the Soviets don't have West Berlin is bothering them, especially since they're losing, look at the number, 4,000 East Germans per week. Imagine the amount of people crossing over. Now, if you remember at the very end of World War One, they split Berlin. Berlin is the capital, the city of Germany. They split it right down the middle. So we have East Berlin belonging to the Soviets. So you have West Berlin belonging to the Allies, or I should say England, France, and the United States. So we would think the free world against the communist world. Well, the communists didn't like sharing this, so and they didn't like the fact that many are leaving East Berlin going to West Berlin, the free Berlin. So literally overnight in August 13th, they build this wall, this cement wall, several feet high with barbed wire on top. And the East Germans wake up the next day and see this wall, and they realize they can't get over. In fact, many that do will be shot for trying to go over. So most walls are built in to keep people out, right? It's a defense. Like, don't come attack us. We're going to build this wall to slow you down from coming in. But this wall was built to keep people in, not to keep people out of the city. This was one of the first times that we actually see like governments blocking their own people in. It's very sad and actually would kill people that would try and go over. And not only was this first one where thousands of people are going over, that looked really bad for the communists, that people are wanting to leave communism. Oh, communism is not good. Whereas the communists are saying it's the best system out there. But then the Berlin Wall even looks much worse, that they're forcing people to stay in. And this is a really bad thing for communists and the Soviet Union. And JFK stands strong and actually sends more troops over to support West Berlin. Another very shaky time for John F. Kennedy was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Notice this is the very beginning of his presidency, so he's really put to the test. Khrushchev was a leader of the Soviet Union, and he is sending missiles to Cuba. Now that communists have control of Cuba, this is like a launching pad for their missiles, specifically nuclear missiles, to the United States. And what John Kennedy does is he sends a blockade to stop German ships from coming in. So now imagine these ships are coming in with the missiles to Cuba. The United States is stopping them. It's kind of like the standoff going on. Like, who's going to give? And if someone fires upon the other, then we have the Cold War becoming an actual arms war, where now we're going to shoot back and forth, and really what we're going to be shooting is nuclear weapons. So this standoff is probably the most tense time in the whole Cold War, is what's going to happen. Well, what will happen is the Russians, the Soviet Union, will turn away and they will go back. Now, one reason why they go back is because the United States says, listen, you got to get everything out of here. You got to get all the missiles out of Cuba. And Soviet Union says, okay, but you have to promise that the United States will never invade Cuba again. And JFK says, okay, we'll never invade. So that's where it went to. No shots were fired, and it seemed to be resolved. So moving on to 343, we see the civil rights movement was a big issue during John F. Kennedy's presidency. And the civil rights is the African Americans standing up for their rights, their civil rights. And it really kind of became an issue whenever this Supreme Court case came about, the Brown versus the Board of Education. Brown was the name of a family that, in fact, you can see on 350, it was a 7-year-old girl that was told that she couldn't go to school. And the family fought it. They took it all the way to the Board of Education, and they took it to the court system and went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't go in. That you have to segregate. Actually, it called for the desegregation. I'm sorry. It said no, that you have to let them in. So this was a monumental point in the civil rights movement, with the Supreme Court support of the desegregation, or the breaking down of segregation. Another big proponent, I want you to know these two people, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. So Rosa Parks, we probably all know, she's the most familiar story, where she boarded a bus, and at this time the segregation said that the whites would sit in the front of the bus. This is the city bus like we have in Miami. The white people would sit at the front and the blacks would sit at the back. Well, she says, no, I deserve this seat just like anyone else. So she sits in the seat. And she got a lot of ridicule for that. In fact, the very next stop, the police were waiting for her because the bus driver had called. And the police were waiting, and they arrested her for not following the law. Now, this will result in the boycott